Okay, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for having me. So, as you've heard, my name is Karen Campbell, and I'm the URC Secretary for Global and Intercultural Ministries. And maybe more of more significance in this meeting now, and why I'm here, is that I'm here as a member of the URC's Legacies of Slavery Task Group. So, I'm going to give you a bit of a presentation about what that is and where we're headed towards. So, just to set the scene, in 2017, the Council for World Mission, CWM, launched its Legacies of Slavery project. And the project held 4 hearings in different locations of significance in the transatlantic slave trade. That was the UK, Ghana, Jamaica, and the US. And what they were doing was trying to explore the relevant histories, but also engaging with the local communities to not just uncover the past, but face up to the continuing legacies for different people around the world today, to consider how we today might work towards putting right the things which continue to be wrong, stemming out of transatlantic slavery. Representatives from the URC took part in all 4 hearings, and the ensuing Legacies of Slavery report made 30 recommendations and encouraged CWM's member churches, of which we are one, to engage with the findings. And so that is how the URC's Legacies of Slavery Task Group was born. The task group was formed in 2019 by the Mission Committee. The group was but diverse. It had women and men, lay and ordained, black and white, young and not so young. And there were some who were new to the racial justice journey and others who had a history of involvement. And the task group was asked to consider how the URC might respond to the Legacies of Slavery report and to make recommendations were under 3 headings, would focus on 3 areas. Firstly, apology. Should the URC offer an apology for the role of our antecedents in transatlantic slavery and for our role today in the continuing legacies of racism and racial inequality? The second heading was reparations. Should the URC offer any form of reparations? What does that mean? What might it look like? And thirdly was the issue of white privilege. This was highlighted by the CWM report as a pervasive, continuingly pervasive issue. So how might we recognize and address where white privilege is at play in the URC and in wider society? What can we do to dismantle white privilege within our own body? So that was our task. The task group completed its task, its initial report to Mission Committee in September 2019. And we were then asked by Mission Council to do further work, including wider consultation, and with a view to bringing recommendations to General Assembly in 2021. The work was unavoidably delayed due to COVID. And in fact, as we reflect on it, what we feel is that the world itself is a very different place since the time of our report 2 years ago. The task group itself is different. We've lost about half of our members and gained a new half to our members. We maintain the diversity that we had before. And so the consultation starts from where we are now. So some people might ask, Legacies of Slavery, what's it got to do with me? I wasn't there, I didn't do it. It's a shameful part of history, but that's what it is. It's history. And in fact, if anybody in your respective places now are, thinking these are some of the thoughts that occur to me, or these are some of the things that I hear other people say, that's fine. These were views that were represented within the task group itself, commonly held views, out there and within. And so we as a task group had to go on a journey together. It wasn't always comfortable, but it was necessary. And that's what we're encouraging the URC to do as we enter this consultation process. Some people say, we live in multicultural, multiracial Britain. Racism, what racism? And what is systemic racism? And what's all this talk about not racist to anti-racist? What is all of this? Surely it's not that much of a problem. And in fact, aren't we creating the problem by stirring people up and saying that there is a problem? Are we exaggerating? And I want to throw the question back. Are we exaggerating? I think there are some people who genuinely maybe had not had reason or occasion to really reflect on or recognize these issues up until now. But if we want to just look at some of recent history, this year, the experience of our the black members of our English football team after they missed the penalties. Before they missed the penalties, our guys, our boys, our team, while we're on the winning streak, as soon as they do something that doesn't fit, go back to where you come from, and all kinds of hatred and vitriol that was poured out against them. But that's just the headline. That's just what grabs the attention. But all of the time, there is a story behind the headline. Ordinary UK Black and ethnic minority people who experience inequalities and systemic racism in terms of jobs, pay, housing, educational opportunities, the criminal justice system, all kinds of things that they're experiencing all of the time. So if we ask the question, are we exaggerating the problem? They might legitimately say, why should the color of my skin be an obstacle to my life? So why are we talking about it now? Why are we talking about it now? Because the truth is, the hurt has always been there. It's always been there. But I think many people have learned to keep their heads down and just get on with it. Because actually, if we don't engage with it, we've got to find our place and stick in our groove. Other people are tired of speaking out and seeing no change, or maybe even seeing things moving backwards. But I think recent events have brought issues to the fore. The murder of George Floyd, the latest in a long line of deaths and abuses of Black people by representatives of the public bodies which are meant to serve and protect all. George Floyd, his death was not the first. It's the latest in a long line. But his death caught the public attention because the world was at a standstill due to COVID. And COVID in itself is another factor. This terrible pandemic, which seems to be disproportionately deadly for Black communities in the United States, in the UK, and around the globe. And I can remember in the early days of COVID, as people were starting to see the inequalities and point it out, some skeptics saying, being quite dismissive and saying, really, can a virus be racist? Is that what you're trying to tell us? And the answer is no, a virus can't be racist. But as we're continuously seeing, the ways that our societies are organized can very definitely be systemically racist, full of inequalities, which put some communities at greater risk. And so there's been this awakening, or maybe a reawakening, of the fact that Black lives matter, or maybe that Black lives should matter, or maybe that Black lives are not being treated as if they matter. And Black people and white people all around the globe are demanding change. So I just want us to focus for a few minutes on racism and its British roots. And this is not trying to say that all of racism is stemming from Britain, but it is saying that racism is entrenched in our way of life, in our society. Whether we want to face it or not, that is a truth. It's entrenched in our history. Britain was a major player in the transatlantic slave trade. And transatlantic slavery played a major role in Britain's commercial and industrial revolutions. It's a history that we often fail to tell ourselves and we fail to tell others. Slavery had existed before, but it was transatlantic slavery that applied slavery almost entirely to Africans. It was transatlantic slavery that defined those who could and couldn't be enslaved by the color of their skins. And so a racial hierarchy became instituted in people's minds, a hierarchy which spread to all areas of the British Empire, even where slavery had not been practiced, such as the Indian subcontinent. So people learned that Black people less, white is more. Black were slaves, white is superior, Black is inferior. This default notion of racial hierarchy still defines systems and relationships within nations and between nations in all spheres of life today. But going back to the history, the slave trade was abolished by Parliament in 1807, followed in 1833 by the abolition of slavery itself throughout the British Empire. But the slave owners were granted £20 million in compensation for their loss of property. That's equivalent to approximately £340 billion today. And it was funded through loans which British taxpayers only finished paying off in 2015. And that's another bit of history that often doesn't get told. And yet, none of the 800,000 ex-slaves in the British territories at that time was compensated for their suppression of their freedom or that of their ancestors. Black people then and now were simply expected to get over it. We might say, okay, we hear all that, but what's it got to do with us now? What's it got to do with us in the URC? And I think the thing is this: the problem is not just out there in the world. It has never been just out there, but very much here in the church. The church is called to be a mirror to society, but too often we are a mirror of society. And it was no different with transatlantic slavery. Many Christians, including people of particular note from our own congregational heritage and our dissenting heritage, were slave owners or involved in transporting slaves or were apologists for transatlantic slavery. You know, as part of our initial research and our initial work, the task group did, go and ask for insights from the URC's History Society. And they highlighted individuals such as William Ayles Hankey, who was one time London Missionary Society treasurer, congregationalist, also a plantation owner, and an apologist for the status quo at that time. The Moulton Barretts, who were plantation owners. William Coward of the Coward Trust, who's continuing, sort of financial legacy to the church, is to fund training for the dissenting ministry. William Coward was a plantation owner, and his ships were used to transport slaves and goods from the plantations. Sir Colin Smith, again, another London Missionary Society treasurer, also a plantation owner. And even apart from those individuals, and there are other individuals who we know have not yet been identified, but we know that they are there. And in addition to that, there is the missionary endeavors themselves, which is part of our history, and whereby the missionary endeavors focus on saving souls rather than on liberating bodies. And often Christian education was regarded as helping to make the enslaved Africans more obedient, more accepting of their slavery, and therefore more profitable. To a great extent, Black people were viewed as less than human. So it wasn't really a sin to enslave them. It wasn't really a sin to abuse them. We could hold this together with our Christian beliefs. White was superior, Black was inferior. And although rarely spoken so starkly, the echoes still, and more than echoes, still remain today. So the task group looked for biblical underpinning for our considerations. And there are very obvious references. The call to love your neighbor, and Jesus' response to the question, who is my neighbor? There is the text, in Christ there is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free. And the example of Zacchaeus, that repairing justice model. Zacchaeus who seeks to put right to an extent even greater than the law required for the wrong that he had inflicted. More recently, we've turned our sights to, the text of the church as Christ's body. This image in which all belong, all have a place. But we question this: are Black people and ethnic minority people continually relegated to the position of the little toe, largely invisible, hidden, overlooked, taken for granted, and yet stub that toe, rake it, and the whole body struggles. Who are in the positions of priority? Who is visible? Who is respected? We've also looked at verses from James chapter 1, because it feels that COVID enabled society and the church to take a good hard look in the mirror and see more clearly so many of our flaws, and particularly those flaws pertaining to racial injustice. But now that lockdown is easing, are we going to forget what we have seen? Are we going to forget God's call to respond to what we have seen? Many people within our denomination point out that the URC has been full of good intentions and positive resolutions for many years, but then we've failed to put them into practice. So the question, when we look in the mirror, how do we see ourselves? What do we see? And when we look in the mirror, how do we see others in comparison to how we see ourselves? So I come to the task group's findings. The Legacies of Slavery task group did a lot of thinking and honest talking. As I said earlier, we were very different people coming from very different backgrounds and contexts, but together we recommended the following. Apology. Yes, the URC should offer an apology and confession, in part for the role played by our predecessors in the transatlantic slave trade, the benefits of which we continue to enjoy. But maybe even more pertinently, that apology and confession should be in recognition for our complicity in the racist legacies of slavery, which continue to shape our world and our nation and our church today. So although we are not responsible for the sins of our forebears centuries ago, we definitely are responsible for allowing those sins to continue to poison our society in the 21st century. We should offer an apology to show our global church partners in Africa and the Caribbean and African diaspora communities, including here within the URC itself, that we have heard their pain. We acknowledge and take seriously our part in causing that pain, and we commit ourselves to redressing the situation. And the task group offers a draft apology for our consideration, for your consideration. This is what we've come up with as we've thought about it. And we've included it in the consultation overview paper that I hope you've all seen. And we'd like your opinions. Is this wording something that you are happy, that you would be, how happy would you be for this wording to be used? And we're hoping that that will be circulated much more widely than just to Synod, but to local churches, for local church conversations. On the issue of reparations, the task group feels that yes, the URC should consider some form of reparations, which we have reworded to repairing justice, some degree of trying to put right. This is needed to give substance to the words of an apology, because actions speak louder than words. Words by themselves are empty. They don't need to mean anything. What does repairing justice look like? Well, it will involve some financial commitment. It's not about repaying, because there is no amount of money that we could come up with, that would enable us to give back what has been lost by Africa and her diaspora communities. It's not possible. But we're thinking that there should be some degree of putting our money where our mouth is, to show our partners, and in fact to show ourselves, that we are serious about this. But in addition to, and we're not even suggesting that it be about just money per se, it's what we do with the money. And we envisage a program of education, truth-telling, community projects, addressing specific situations, specific needs in our local communities, trying to put right what is wrong. And on the third area, white privilege, we recommend an ongoing journey of engagement with and understanding of the issues of white privilege, in order that we can work together, all of us together, to redress the balance and bring about true racial justice as part of our journey towards justice for all, and as an integral part of our commitment to journeying from not racist to actively anti-racist. That policy that we adopted, that resolution that we adopted last November. The task group is seeking to engage with people across the breadth of the URC to find out your thoughts, your responses, whether you're supportive of the direction of travel, whether you think we've missed anything that is key. We're working with a view to bringing concrete proposals to General Assembly in 2022, which is the URC's Jubilee year. And when we think about the biblical meaning of Jubilee, we think that it's very, very apt. So we see the Synod meetings as a launch pad to a wider consultation. Yes, we want to hear what you've got to say to us in the Synod meetings, but we're also looking and asking to be invited for local church and local group conversations and to hear from people on the ground at grassroots level.